Oh, right, I think we're there. Good evening and welcome everybody to this evening's lecture from Winscott, the Curator of Properties for Stonehenge and West for the English Heritage Trust. The title of this evening's talk is the Toponymic, I think that's right, Landscape of the Ridgeway, Signs from the Past. The talk is being recorded and will appear in due course on the Ridgeway National Trail YouTube channel. Your microphones and videos are switched off to avoid any accidental interruption. But at the end of the talk, do please ask questions using the chat function. These talks are funded by the North Wessex Downs National Landscape. And without further ado, we're very lucky to have you here. So when you're ready, do please start.
Okay, thank you so much, Dan, for inviting me. And it's a real delight to talk to all of you about a subject that I'm really passionate about, but I don't profess to be a big expert on it. There are people who are real experts in toponyms and place names who could probably do a better job than I am. But I've been particularly interested in the place names around the Ridgeway, particularly those of around Uffington. And I was originally inspired by Margaret Gelling. She died in 2009, but she was a person, an academic that introduced archaeologists to place names in the landscape. Hitherto, archaeologists generally regarded as place names as not being terribly important and not very scientific. But they have become recognized much better now as being very scientific, and particularly because of the work of Margaret Gelling, also Anne Cole as well, and Della Hook, done amazing work, and more recently Susan Oosthuizen. So there's a whole range of books, and I can always recommend them. But Margaret Gelling, Place Names in the Landscape, this particular book here that I'm just holding up, was a great inspiration. And then she wrote Signposts to the Past, Place Names in the History of England. I'm actually a prehistorian, and I find English place names as fantastic clues to finding prehistoric sites. And archaeologists have known this for years. If you find a field that's got the name Bury in it, it usually means there's a lost, say, a ploughed out hill fort or something like that. And berries are quite ubiquitous in the landscape. So before Margaret Gelling, really everybody concentrated on the classic place name elements like tun, an enclosure, a farm, or ham, which also means like a homestead, or worth, an enclosure. But she started looking at how names describe the topography. So she looked at names like cumb and deen, and dun and ho, and ora and ofa. So these are descriptions of the shape of the landscape, the topography of the landscape. She could say that a dun was a low, broad-topped hill, often with a settlement on it. Farringdon being an example. A ho, near where I live, there's Plymouth Hoe, a heel-shaped spur of land or projecting piece of ground. There are lots of hoes around the country. Cumb, mainly found in the southwest. A valley, usually a bowl-shaped valley, which is quite different from a dene. You get denes, particularly in somewhere like Hertfordshire. And they are long, narrow valleys with moderately steep sides. And an ora is a hill, slope, bank, or edge, often a boundary marker. And an ofa is the tip of a flat-topped hill spur or a hill spur or a river bank. So Gelling demonstrated that place names are really quite accurate in their meaning, and they aren't woolly like a lot of people thought. Now, just one of the other books that I think is absolutely gold dust. And if I'm ever on a desert island and I have to choose my book, I'm going to choose books from the English Place Name Society. There are, I don't know, a couple of hundred volumes of these. My bookshelves are groaning under these at the moment. And this one is one of 3 volumes of the place names of Berkshire. Sorry, Oxfordshire. Uffington used to be in Berkshire, as I'm sure a lot of you know. And she goes exhaustively, Margaret Gelling, this is, through the Old English charter boundaries of Berkshire. She also does an introduction to the place names of Berkshire and analysis of material. And have I got the other volumes here? She goes basically parish by parish, all the major names and some of the field names and minor names in those. Now, today I'm going to be looking at the bounds of Uffington in the Old English Charter boundaries of Berkshire. And we'll be looking at those on the map. And I'd like to encourage any of you who are into doing field work, archaeology of the landscape, and getting their boots on the ground. I'd encourage you to get out because there's a lot of work still to be done. I think a lot of it so far has been done by armchair archaeologists or armchair toponymists who basically look at the maps. Nowadays they might look at LiDAR as well, but there are good ways of doing it from your armchair. But better still is to get out on the ground, and it's something I'd love to do, is get out onto the ground and find all these little points of interest that are described in the Old English charters. I'm going to open my PowerPoint now just to get that going. Better share my screen. And let's get started. Sorry, these aren't very particularly pretty pictures that I'm showing. But so this is what I'm going to be talking about, the toponymic landscape. Topos, nimics, topos as in topography, nimic as in synonyms, names. It's a posh word for place names, basically. The landscape of the Ridgeway, Margaret Gelling, and the Anglo-Saxon charters of the Uffington Corridor. So we're looking at landscape, language, and administrative history along the Berkshire Downs. And really, we're going back to the 10th century. So the early medieval period. And the 10th century legal documentation. And these charters are the first documents written in English that aren't literature. They aren't poems like Beowulf. They are just strict, ordinary prose of ordinary individuals. They're not people trying to be poetic or, well, I suppose I ought to include Bede amongst the historical things, but this isn't literature. This is Old English as used by the ordinary people on the ground. So, as I say, Margaret Gelling, she caused a bit of a revolution, really, because she moved from the Tuns and the Hams and the Worths, all those habitative names, basically settlement names. She moved to names of the shapes of the landscape, topographical elements describing the natural environment. As she says, Anglo-Saxon namers were very accurate about how they described the shape of the landscape, the geomorphology, if you like. And she was very good at correlating linguistic data with geology and on-site observation to redefine Old English vocabulary. Reading Old English is quite difficult. Since the end of the Roman period, since 400 AD, when the Anglo-Saxons arrive, there are basically 3 main classifications of English. Old English, Middle English. Now, Middle English is the language of Chaucer. And then Modern English, which is the language of Shakespeare and our own language. So 3 main classifications. But Old English is basically spoken from the end of the Roman period, let's say 410 AD, when the Anglo-Saxons start to arrive, and 1066. So we're going to be looking at that language quite a lot from that period. What's that? 600 years or so. So it's a big chunk of history when this extraordinary language was spoken. It really does seem quite odd to us sometimes when we hear the language. So she talked to Gaelic. I've already mentioned these. Dun, a low, broad-topped hill. Ho, a heel-shaped spur with a concave scarp. Valleys and slopes. Whoops, sorry, and slipped. Coombs, deans, Ofa, and Ora. So Anglo-Saxon charters as verbal maps. They didn't have maps. So the way they described boundaries were by places in the landscape. So if you wanted to describe the bounds of Uffington, you basically had to say, walk from that tree to that stream, run along the stream and as far as the stone, and then from the stone, walk up to the old tree at the top of the hill, then walk to the barrow, and then walk to the old castle, etc. That's basically how it did. And so these were the Old English boundary clauses. Let me just check my notes. So the boundary clause was basically a verbal perambulation of the estate, usually following a clockwise circuit from a starting point back to the beginning. So they did a full circle around the parish. And these clauses, these boundary clauses, preserve the names of minor landmarks, trees, pits, barrows, and trackways. That never evolved into parish or village names. They represent the most extensive evidence of non-literary Old English and provide a direct link to the 10th century landscape. Now, the reason these texts survive is thanks to the monks of Abingdon Abbey. It's the only reason they survive in the later medieval cartularies. They are meticulous and they're based on physical inspection of the land. This isn't armchair monks. This is people actually walking the ground. The local people of the parish, presumably. And they're usually drafted by a central royal chancery, and in many cases they are gifts of the king to the abbey. Now, all these charters have names, Sawyer numbers they're called. A man called Sawyer numbered them. And we're going to be looking at charter number Sawyer 412, the Uffington Grant. It's dated AD 931, when King Athelstan granted land at Uffington to the monastery of St. Mary at Abingdon. It's a foundational document for the region. It explicitly identifies the hill fort above the village, what we know as Uffington Castle. It identifies it as Ashborough. And this basically means, well, it can either mean the fortress of the ash tree, but I think it's more likely the fortress of or stronghold of someone called Ash, Aesc. Let me just move my slides on. Sorry, lost my place. And this perambulation mentions the White Way and the Ridgeway itself, which is referred to as Ridgeway. And it proves that the ancient track was not merely a route for travel, but a formal legal boundary that delineated the northern edge of the upland grazing lands. These parish bounds in the boundary clauses correspond very closely to the modern parish limits. So usually we can work out which features they're referring to. Uffington, of course, occupies a unique position in the Berkshire Downs, serving as a symbolic focal point and a centre of administrative power. The village name Uffantun is basically the personal name Uffa, and the genitive of that, what the equivalent of us putting an apostrophe S, is Uffen, and Uffentun is Uffa's tun, his farmstead or estate. So there was some person called Uffa, possibly in the 10th or 9th century, or maybe even earlier, who was given this estate. We don't know anything more about Uffa. The village sits on the fertile clay soils of the Vale, and it's looked down upon by Uffington Castle, which was a major Iron Age hill fort above the White Horse there. They can see it from the air. I'm using the personal name Ash there, Ash's stronghold. You can also see it here in LiDAR, the laser detection and ranging that's used to detect the shape very well. So such hill forts often served as assembly places, Merthelstowe, back in the early medieval period. Clearly, it was still regarded as a central point by the Anglo-Saxons, even though they weren't living in it. Moving on to the next one. I'm going to jump that. Well, no, I will go to this slide now, actually, just to show you what horrible text in Old English these charters do. So this is, I'm reading from the top, this sind the Langamera into Uffington. Excuse me to all those Anglo-Saxons listening, of my accent isn't brilliant, but these are the land boundaries, Gamer, in Uffington. And then you can see these awful phrases, and there's a lot of repetition. Rest of Frismere, lang their lake, or lake, into their black lake, of their black lake in an Bullemere, of Bullemere to Bulfurthersdorter, of Thamsdorter into Bullenditch, and it just goes rhythmically on and on. In fact, I wonder if these were actually sung or chanted like Gregorian chants, because people had to memorize these. People in the parish, particularly the officials, the chair of the parish council or whatever it was at that time, would have had to have known these. And you've probably heard about beating the bounds when small children were taken around the bounds of a parish and beaten, or Dan was just telling me they used to bang their heads on stones and things. It was a way of remembering it when you hadn't got writing. It was really important to memorize this. So when we read this, we can hear that rhythm going on. And I think a lot of people, perhaps everybody in the parish, could recite the boundaries of their parish. So Erest means first, or let's start at Thurasmere, which is the crosswise lake. A mere is a lake, and it ends at the end in Thurasmere Midrights. So it does full circle and ends at the crosswise lake at the end there. But we'll go into those in a little bit more detail in a minute. Yeah, just quick mention of the White Horse, of course. Unfortunately, it's not mentioned in any of the charters, which is a bit of a problem, particularly as our optically stimulated luminescence dating that was done back in 1991-92 shows it to be late Bronze Age or Iron Age. So that's a bit of a mystery. But one of the reasons it doesn't appear in the charters may be because it's not on the boundary. They didn't have to include anything within the parish. Symbolism, absence in charters. Yeah, it's not in the charter. These parishes, Uffington, Woolstone, and all the others, are long, narrow strip parishes that cross the geological grain. So they gave each settlement an opportunity to have pasture on the high ground, fertile ground in the bottom, and have access to spring line. So if we look at the Vale of the White Horse here, you can see there's Uffington pretty well in the middle of this, running up to the Berkshire Downs, on the bottom of this thing, the uh, the village of Uppington in the middle there, and a whole big space of enclosed pasture, which we'll have another look at in a moment. And this is what I mean by the geological grain, if you like. I found this online, so I hope it doesn't mind. I hope it doesn't matter me cribbing it off the Ordnance Survey here, but it is online, and you can see that the weft, if you like, of the landscape runs east to west, but these parishes are long strips running up to the Berkshire Downs like that, so that every parish has a nice slice of the cake. We should be glancing not only Ashbury, which is Uffington Castle, but also Rams Hill, which actually was originally Ramsbury. In other words, bury, the Old English word for a stronghold. Stronghold is my preferred term. It's written B-U-R-H, Burh, but in the dative or the locative, it's often written birig or biri, which is why a bur becomes a biri. But that's just technical Old English grammar. Interestingly, Ramsbury is nothing to do with sheep. It's actually a corruption, a modern corruption of what was originally Ravensfort, the Ravens' Fort. And interestingly, there's a little bit of an echo with Woden's familiar, the raven. So we're looking at a landscape that is full of resonance of mythology. And I'll come to that a bit later as well. Well, yeah, talking of mythology, there's the references to Wayland's Smithy. The Anglo-Saxon view of this Neolithic chambered tomb from around about 3700 BC was that it must be where Wayland, who's well known in Germanic literature, to have actually had his smithy. This is where he would have hammered his iron swords and spears. But we have other sites like Beer Hills Barrow and Whittock as well nearby, all references to Anglo-Saxon personalities as well. Go back to my my notes. And a little bit further along, there are the Letcombs, Letcomb Regis and Letcomb Basset, on the eastern terminus of the this specific Ridgeway corridor. Letcomb comes from Ledacum, Chlud, loud, cumb. So the cumb is obviously again a bowl-shaped valley, and the stream in there is the loud stream. So that's where we get the word Letcomb, Ludicum. And Galling and Cole noted that whereas Dean was or Denu was the standard name for a long narrow valley, Coombe was specifically applied to this bowl-shaped valley that the Letcombs sit in. The boundary, by the way, the boundary clauses for the Letcombs are particularly rich in topographical detail. They mention things like the Old Way, the thorn trees, and the various pits that served as markers between the royal estate and the estate held by the Basset family in the post-conquest period. This was a meaningful landscape that we have here. Lots of names in the landscape that are bringing echoes of mythology and ownership. Woolstone is between Ashbury and Uffington, was actually originally Wulfrixton. So Wulfric was the name, a bit like my own actually. My name isn't Wyn, it's Winfrid, which is an Old English name. But But wolf, whereas win means peace, wolf means wolf. And Rick is the name we have in a lot of names, like Rick, like Richard. And I'm just trying to think of other Ethelfric and people like that. So Rick is like Reich, ruler. So Wulfrickston or Woolston was the farmstead of Wulfric. Wulfric Cuffing was actually a powerful 10th century landowner who held estates right across Berkshire. So it's possible that when the Ashdown estate was broken up, divided, Wulfric gave his name to one part of that, Woolston. And then further along there's Childry. The Childry actually means it comes from Chilan Rith, which actually means chillers or Scylla. I think Chiller is the proper pronunciation rather than the pronunciation in Scylla Black. Chiller stream, and Rith is a small stream. And that's where it's located, where the Rith, the small stream, emerges from the chalk. And the next parish, Sparsholt, actually derives its name from Spearholt, where spear shafts were obtained, a holt where woodland, where spear shafts were obtained. So it gives you a clue as to how specialized some woodlands could be in the Anglo-Saxon economy, specific copses designated for the production of essential tools and weapons in this particular case. Yes, I mentioned a moment ago that we actually, I'll flip back to that slide. No, it's that one. Leslie Grinsell and Margaret Gelling both talked about the relationship between Wayland Smithy and other nearby sites. They referred to a toponymic family in the charters and local names. Wayland, associated with the smithy on the Ridgeway, Beerhild, his lady associated with Beerhild Briggles, the Beerhild's burial, which is around Barrow north of Cowley's farm, and Wittock, the result of their union, associated with Wittock's Law, Wittock's Mound. So lots of mythology. And David Miles, who's been, has a long modern archaeological history around the White Horse. And I've got his book next to me here, his wonderful book of the land of the White Horse, Visions of England. Well, David Miles actually referred to Herdwell as being referring to a hoard, perhaps, and all sorts of features in the landscape, like Dragon Hill, that refer to this sort of mythological package in the landscape. And a little bit further down the valley, we got Quitholm's Knob, otherwise known as Scutchhammer Knob, a large Iron Age mound that served as a burial site for King Quichelm of the Gwisi, the early West Saxons in the 7th century. And the name Quichelm's Law, as I should pronounce it, is recorded in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle as a site of battles in 592 and 716. So Chlor we see a lot. There are two names. Excuse me while I have a little cough. Pardon me. There are two names for burial mounds in English place names. One is Beorg, not to be confused with Borough, which is for a stronghold, but Beorg we see a lot, and often pronounced Borough. And Chlor, which gets corrupted in modern English to Low. So names like Taplow or Brownlow, or in this case, Scutchammer's Knob, or should be Scutchammer's Low, if you like. So Low is often from Chlor, and Borough is often from Beorg. This mound sits in a kind of sentinel type position, overlooking the Vale and positioned directly on the Ridgeway. In fact, in 1844, a local landowner removed cartloads of soil from the mounds, believing it contained the remains of warriors from the Battle of Ashdown. So, moving on a little bit, the Ridgeway is a military frontier. It's obviously the Ridgeway is obviously a primary artery for movement of military, and it's associated with conflict and assembly. The Battle of Ashdown in 871 is the most significant historical event linked to this corridor. We don't really know where the exact location of that was, but somewhere around. And there's references to the wait and the ambush at Ashbury. Peter Knott and Margaret Gelling discuss the significance of this name, the wait, along the escarpment near Ashbury. Gelling interpreted the wait as a lookout place, while the OED suggests an ambush or lying in wait. So it may preserve the memory of a strategic position when King Alfred's forces lay in wait for the Danish army as they marched out of Reading and along the Ridgeway. The geography of the battle, as described by Asser, involves the Danes holding the high ground. The Ridgeway provided exactly such a tactical advantage. The movement of armies along these high roads is a recurring theme in the charters, which often mention the Port Street, the Market Road, or Heer Path, or Heera Path. It's an army path in their boundary clauses. So I'm now going to divert slightly into a little bit of Old English, and we're going to look at the charters on a map. But before I do, I'm going to play you what Old English sounds like. Now, this is from a Teach Yourself Old English course by the brilliant Stephen Pollington, and I hope he wouldn't mind me using it now. And you can still buy it online, I think, this particular thing. But this is a little bit about King Alfred, and you can hear some real Old English now, and I hope this works.
On Athelney. Her hinne bestal se herre on midne winter, over 12th night, to Chippenhamme, Juridon West Saxna land, on Saturn, und Mitchell thas folkes, over Sa adraton, und thas odres, thon mastan dal hier Juridon, und him to Jirdon, buton tham Kuninge Alfrede, und he lytsle werode, uniederliche after woodum for, and on morfastanum. And thus ilchan winter was inwares brother on helftenes.
Well, I don't know if you managed to pick up any words there. You might have heard Chippenham. You might have picked up one or two other words, winter, in there. But yeah, Old English is a completely different language, but it's the one our modern language or modern English evolves from, with a little bit of French and other words thrown in. Now I'm going to just change screens now and share a different one, because I'd like to take you through, if I can get this to work, a map. It's not actually that map. It is this map. Now this is actually a map of the Ridgeway. The Ridgeway, I don't know if you can see Ashbury on your left, and I don't know if you can follow my cursor along the Ridgeway here. Actually, it's up higher there, along there, and that's the Icknield Way along there. And that in the middle is Uffington Castle. So that's hopefully orientates you. Now, this amazing map is Historic England's aerial investigation mapping data. And it shows all these massive areas of later prehistoric fields. These are all field systems. And you can see them in great detail. And good old Historic England has mapped them all. These, if you click on these, they'll tell you that they're later prehistoric. They could be anything from the late Bronze Age, say 1400 BC, right through to the Roman period. They're very distinctive. They're often called, on the old Ordnance Survey map, they're often called Celtic fields. And if we move north, there are large areas around the village of Uffington that Historic England has recorded as ridge and furrow. So much more recent agricultural activity dating to the medieval period. Now, the reason I've called up this particular wonderful map of all the archaeology known from the air is because it's a great way to follow the charter boundaries, because sometimes the charter boundaries are referring to features that we can actually see on the Historic England tracing. So I'm going to switch on. I did this in the course of today. The boundaries. Now that long description, the boundary clause that I showed you earlier on that looked like a load of gobbledygook, I've now broken it down so that we can go clockwise around the parish of Uffington, looking at each one of these names. So Thurasmere, sorry, a lot of this isn't written in proper Old English script, but it's, it gives you an idea. So this is the crosswise lake, the mere. And here it says, and lang the lake, along the stream. In Old English, the name for a stream was, confusingly, a lake. We use the name lake for mere because the French taught us how to use the word lac. But anyway, so when you see lake in Old English, it means a stream. So entlang, along the lake, into the Black Lake, and from the Black Lake into the Bullermere. So a mere called Buller, and then down of Bullermere to Bulfurda's Stort. Stort is a headland. We often see it like Start Point. Places like that, Start is a projection. And from the start to Bullendyke. So the or ditch, could be Bull and Ditch actually, to the name of a ditch. And actually I've put it here because I think this feature here may actually be the Bull and Ditch, which has been picked up by Historic England, that red line going through here. And it says along the Bull and Ditch to the Thornstubber. That's a thorn tree, the stump of a thorn tree, a stub. It's a bit like a cigarette stub. Of them thorn stub into their haly stow, to the holy stow. So somewhere around here is some kind of perhaps important holy place for the Anglo-Saxons. And then of the Heilig Stow and lang their hefter along the headland into Icknield Street. Icknield Street, the Roman street. And from Icknield Street to the Aylfords March, to Aylward's boundary. A march, as in the Welsh marches. A merk is a march or march. And then from Aylward's March uprights up to the headland, to Ramsbury, Northgate. So we're going to go in there, the Northgate, and that through the Berry, through the Berry, to the Southgate. Yeah, there's the Southgate. And let's travel southward. Southward to the Hefter, the headland, up to the Hodslaw. Remember I mentioned Hlaw is a barrow, a burial mound. So this is someone called Hodders, or Hod. Hod is Hod. Someone called Hod, basically. Law. And I won't take you around all of the bounds. I'll take you around a few because it's quite entertaining. And this is something you could do. And some of this gets lost. And this is where it needs some good field work on the ground. From Hod's Law, often to the Stan Law, where is this stone barrow? I can't see it in the Historic England maps. I can't see it in any of the aerial photographs. So perhaps it's been robbed. Perhaps all the stone has been taken away. And then we flip across to the from the Stanlaw to the Inandan Chritan hole. A hole is a valley, a hollow, if you like. And this is the White Hollow. And there is actually a Whit Cumb here. So that's where I think that probably is, in amongst all these prehistoric field boundaries. And then from the White Hollow to the Reeden Hollow, the reeds, the whole of the reeds. Reeden Hollow to the Dunan Hollow. I'm not sure what that one is. Dunfara's Ness. And Ness is like Loch Ness is a headland. To Paddybury now. Where's Paddybury? This is a stronghold, but I don't know where it is. Perhaps it's that thing over there. Don't know. Hunderslaw, Hounds Barrow, Huffolk's Law, Hawk's Barrow, to the Studfold. Basically, a stud is the horse, horses, as in a horse's stud, from Huffolk's Law to the Studfold. And then they refer to the Larksberry, the lark. This is the bird, the lark, to the short dike. And here I think that we can actually see a short dike here, prehistoric one that they're referring to. And then it says from the short butt dike ditch onto the Langen ditch, the long ditch. So I think we've got it identified here. And then from the Lang ditch into Ashbury, Southgate. And from there to the North Gate, which could be there. And Dudenbury. Oh, yes. Now this gets interesting. Sorry, I was going to stop soon. But from the Dudenbury, again, some kind of stronghold referred to here. But we go to Ecclesbeil. Beil is another name for a barrow. Do you remember I was saying that it's a bit like law? Eccles is an amazing word. Not only the name that gives Bernie Eccleston his name, or Eccles Cakes, or Eccles in Merseyside. Wherever we get Eccles, it comes from the Greek, believe it or not, which the Greek word is ecclesia, which means an assembly. And it referred to Christian assemblies. And usually we can expect to find a church, an early Christian church, if there's an Eccles. Unfortunately, no sign of this here. And maybe there wasn't actually a church. Maybe it just meant that this was an assembly place for Christians at some stage. So Ecclesbeil, well, this has always been interpreted as being Dragon Hill, but I'm not so sure. They refer to Dragon Hill. Dragon Hill is very close to the parish boundary, so it makes sense. But was there a church there once? Was it a place of Christian assembly? Anyway, let's head north. Then to Icknield Street, the Roman road. Street pretty well always means Roman road. And then to the headland, to the furrow, to the these are all referring to agricultural furrows, arable furrows. Down to the Rish bed, the Rush bed, the Dawnstone, the hidden stone. Of the Dawnstone to the Rish Biffle. This is a rush thicket. A bit difficult to find now. from the rush thicket to the Lippenham. We don't know what that means, but it could be referring to a low-lying piece of ground ham, or it could mean a settlement. From the Lippenham to the mill stream, self-explanatory. Mill stream to the north, like ditch, Bullmead, to the Clean Mead, northward to the north, and then we get back to the Thorsmere Midrites. Yeah, so that's where we started. So if I zoom out, you just see a whole load of horrible text. But you can see that these boundary clauses, and you don't have to just do it for Uffington, you can do it for all the parishes along here, because we've got the Abingdon boundary clauses for all of these. And if you want to pick up the, Margaret Gelling's place names of Berkshire, they are there in detail. But they're also, just going to cough again, excuse me. Terrible cold for a couple of weeks. And have I kept it? Have I kept it open? Yeah. There is this lovely website, Landscape, the language of landscape, reading the Anglo-Saxon countryside. And here is this exact boundary clause that we've been talking about, rest of Thorsmere. And so you can go to all of them. So get your boots on, print these out, look at it on the maps, and head out there. Of course, being respectful to private land, but of course you will. But there's a lot of field work that that those of you who love the Ridgeway can go out and do. So I'm going to go back now to to share my other screen now. I hope that's right. I haven't looked at chat lately just to see if there are any comments like you saying that you can't see it. So I'm just going to have a look to see if there's any urgent messages. No, we're fine. So this is why these maps, when they didn't have maps, these boundary clauses were such wonderful resources for archaeologists and local historians and anybody who wants to just enjoy the landscape in a different way. These boundary systems show how little has changed in many ways. Territorial stability. These modern parish boundaries are pretty well exactly the same they were 1100, 1200 years ago, which is amazing. And the place names show that there's, even though we don't understand a lot of these place names now, because they're in Old English, not in modern English, they just show this unbroken narrative of humans using the landscape. And Gelling's work was just amazing about how she opened up the language of place names from just being a fairly set study of habitative names like tuns and hams and worths, and open it up to start understanding how those place names relate exactly to the shapes of the landscape, to the land on the ground, and it's something we can all follow. I'm going to stop there. I don't know how I'm doing for time. I haven't checked lately. Oh, it's pretty well, not too bad actually. I'm going to throw it open to questions. Dan, can you? I'm told that you're invited to put your questions into the chat, and I hope you're familiar with Teams. You'll find the chat button at the top, and you can just simply write your questions in there. And Dan's gonna moderate for me and pick the juicier questions out and throw them at me.
Well, thank you, Rid. If I may just start by saying what a thoroughly interesting and wonderfully illustrated and well presented presentation. It's really interesting. Thank you. I love the idea of the chant of the bounds as well. Really
Mm,
nice, and how literal they were about the features in the landscape.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely. They're a
but,
joy, aren't they?
oh, amazing! There's one they refer to the Grimm's Ditch, the North Bucks Grimm's Ditch as the dragon's backbone, and I always think that's wonderfully
Ah,
descriptive because
yeah.
it just looks like some great beast on its side with a spine. It's anyway. Sorry, I'll stop rambling.
Well, it's interesting. Drachas and Grim are both really interesting names because you get Drachas barrows around the place, you know. So the Anglo-Saxons did believe in dragons, Dracha, and Grim is obviously another name for the Grim Reaper. It's Woden, and you know, my own feeling is that Grimm's ditches were places that you shouldn't cross. You know, they were inhabited with dark spirits. And I got this idea from someone who was studying African archaeology, because they said that in Africa, they they kind of enrich ditches, boundaries with dark spirits, so that even though you could easily climb across them, nobody will, because they're full of evil. So I think that was the idea of Grimm's Ditch. It was full of evil.
Oh, interesting. And we do have a couple of questions, but if I may sneak one in first, along those lines, I wonder if you had any thoughts about perhaps that North Berkshire Grimsditch being the his well, at least at some point in its history, the boundary between the kingdoms of Mercia and Wessex.
Oh, that's something I really want to follow actually. And there has been a big project done on the Anglo-Saxon boundaries. There's been a big HRC funded project on those, which I haven't really delved into enough yet. But uh, yes, and the trouble with Grimstitch is that it's probably late Bronze Age, isn't it, or Iron Age?
Either very early Iron Age or late Bronze Age. I think, well, current thing, there's been so little field work done.
Yeah.
Um,
And they're very difficult to date, aren't they? And I mean, nowadays we've got optically stimulated luminescence dating, and if we had the money and the investment, we could go and take augers and sections through lots of these ditches and try to understand, when they started and how they've been repurposed over the years. It'd be really great to do that.
nice.
And we have got old territories there, but whose territories are they? And is there continuity between Bronze Age and Iron Age territories and Anglo-Saxon territories? I mean, I'm someone who passionately believes in a lot of that continuity. I don't believe this sort of old history book stuff that we were fed in, decades ago. That everything. Romans come along, everybody chucks everything out and starts again, and then the Saxons come, start everything again, and Normans come, everybody. The history of Britain does not work in that chest of drawers fashion. Often it's the replacement of the powerful by a new elite, whether it's Romans or Normans, but everybody else pretty well stays the same. And I think a lot of the boundaries stay the same. There is tons of continuity in the landscape.
Oh, thank you for this. So top down, I like the chest of drawers idea. Thank you for that. Sorry, but I've been selfish. There are some questions there. Uh, do you, one from uh, Jill. Do you expect to become a linguist to become involved in this area of interest?
Well, I'm not actually a linguist. I mean, I happen to be half German, so that helps with Old English, and I studied Latin and Greek, and so I'm an amateur linguist. But no, using these place name books like 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 Margaret Gelling's, the place names of Berkshire, you can find your way through it, and it has dictionaries if you like. If I go to page 878 in this particular volume, I can look up place name elements as found in Berkshire. So hay, It'll explain it all, where they occur. Let me see. Hengist, Old English for a horse, stallion, a gelding, a hen, a water hen, as found in well, I think Hanny, East and West Hanny, I think, are both from waterfowl, if I remember rightly. Although they don't mention it here, but then that's because they're in Oxfordshire. So you can use the dictionary here, uh, and you don't need to be a linguist. You can have enormous fun, and you can buy these volumes. You can still get online. You might have to go to a secondhand bookseller like Abe Books or something like that. But if you're really into it, place names of your area, go to your English place names survey book, and that's a brilliant spot to start.
Thank you, Richard. It certainly gives us ideas of tasks for volunteers that might find interesting to be going out into the field and spot checking these things on the ground. These places identified in the charters.
I should say that Margaret Gelling does translate all those words in the charters, so you can muddle your way through. You don't have to understand it. She explains each word. So thrittle, or whatever the word was, I had to look that up, and it says, she says this is a thicket. But lipan, she says nobody knows what that one means. So yeah, you can work your way through. Gelling is a nice walking stick for it.
So thank you. We have a question from Daisy. What's something that you would consider to be the most interesting about the Anglo-Saxons?
Oh, goodness me. It's a very good one, and my own research is actually debunking the Anglo-Saxons, but I'm not going to go into it. There's a lot to be learnt about the Anglo-Saxons from DNA, but it's still an emerging discipline. So how many, was it just a couple of ships that came in? Did they all come in one big rush? Were there very many of them, or was it an elite takeover? I mean, the implication from the place names is that it's a massive takeover because, a changeover to the English language. But my own research over the last 20 years is, which I'm not releasing right now, but it will debunk about a lot of that. But the traditional view is that it's a massive population replacement and a linguistic replacement that pushes out the Celtic languages. Celtic in inverted commas.
On that one, sorry, there's a question from Lucy, but as it's on the same subject, I wonder, with a borrowing language like English, is there any etymological link between the sort of Brythonic Celtic, in inverted commas, cumb and the Old English cumb?
It doesn't occur elsewhere in Germanic. But it does occur in Celtic. So it seems to be a borrowing from Celtic, at least in the southwest of England. If you look at the distribution of the element cumb, you'll see that it's confined to. It doesn't even go to the sort of towards Chester. It hugs down to the southwest of England and laps up onto the Welsh border. On the River Severn sort of thing, but it doesn't go further north. So it's definitely a southwestern phenomenon. It doesn't seem to be coming in from Wales. Weirdly, it seems to be coming from.
That's interesting. Thank you. Sorry, on to Lucy's question. How much more forested were the valleys compared to the Ridgeway at the time in question, and how did that affect the setting of boundaries and navigation around them? Were the forests a valuable resource, or were arable strip lands more valuable?
Well, one of the interesting things that I often repeat nowadays in talks is the paleoenvironmental research that's been done in recent years, 10 years or more, has shown that the southern Britain had the same forest clearance, the same level of woodland in the Iron Age as it does today. which is a remarkable thought. Because loads of people think. I remember Oliver Rackham, who I was lucky enough to meet some years ago, basically said the same thing, but that was before the paleo-environmental stuff showed that he was right. He criticized this sort of romantic idea that we have from Disney films of, Robin Hood riding through the glen, and whatever it is, through forests. And films still do it, whenever they place, whether it's a TV series or Netflix or whatever, whenever they talk about the medieval period, they always have people trotting on horses through woodland. But actually, the woodland had all gone by the first millennium BC. There were patches of woodland all over the landscape, as there is today. But we know from the pollen evidence that the extent of woodland cover is exactly the same as it is today from the first millennium BC. So when we come to the Ridgeway, that was all cleared land. And do you remember all those field systems I showed? They're late Bronze Age or Iron Age. So it shows that the uplands of the Berkshire Downs are pretty, were completely cleared. This will all be open landscape at that time. But with patches of woodland and probably patches of water in the Vale. These mere names, I think these meres were quite extensive. Bullermere and Thurasmere. The whole of the Vale of the White Horse probably had lots of meres, lots of lakes in it at one stage. So in some ways a similar landscape, lots of farming, clearance, pasture, but the water was very different, I think.
That's really interesting. Thank you. And I should say at this point, I don't know if any of our citizen science LiDAR volunteers are here, but they've, in addition to the NMP, the fantastic NMP that the Historic England hold, they have identified about 10,000 field boundaries so far. Most of them are prehistoric and Roman, and they're moving on to different types of feature now. Sorry, if I may ask another one, sorry, Wyn. You gave some potential dates for battles at Cucumsey that I was completely unaware of, and I'm fascinated by the site, absolutely. And there was one in the 6th century, and I think one you said in 716. Do you think it's I suppose that's more of a statement, but the question is, I suppose, do you think it's a likely site for the Battle of Ashdown in 871, or is it something you don't really want to get into?
I probably don't want to get into that now. I mean, it's anybody's guess, really. Yeah, I presume it's the same Ashdown. Yes, it's yeah. No, and that's not something I've looked into at all. Yeah, so can't help on that, I'm afraid.
Okay, just something from John Gordon saying there's lots of lakes in the valley today. In the
I think they're more puddles in my view. I think a mere, when an early medieval person, or Anglo-Saxon if you like, was talking about a mere, they were talking about a substantial mass of water. I think we're talking about half a kilometer long. That's the sort of order of size, or longer, or wider. They have other words for small things, like pole, the pool. By the way, I'm going to flip back to that other question about Celtic words infiltrating. A lot of the words are the same in Old English as they are in Celtic. So Dun is often perceived as a Celtic name, but actually it's also a Germanic name. They both come from the Indo-European roots of languages. So there's a lot of names that are sometimes attributed to Celtic, but they can equally be Germanic.
That's really interesting. I suppose with the meres, you've got things like the Hannies, which are just islands in the bog, aren't they? Effectively, um, but
Indeed. My favorite place name element, by the way, is not Beog or Borough or any of these. It's E-G or I-E-G. In West Saxon, it's I-E-G. And I've so far collected a few hundred of these across Britain. They vary from marine islands, like Jersey and Orkney, and Caldy, to riverine islands like Battersea on the Thames or Pewsey. We've got lots of place names that end with S-E-Y or N-E-Y. Athelney, which is the one I mentioned earlier on, Alfred and Athelney, means the Prince's Island. So N-E-Y or S-E-Y, you have to check your place names books, but that usually means an island. And you'll often find, particularly in Berkshire, that or Oxfordshire. Let me see. There's a whole load in Oxford. Remind me. By the railway station. I'm just trying to think. Forgotten the names. But you'll see that there's quite a few island place names there. Binsey is one. Yes, Osney. That's the one I was trying to think of. Yeah.
thank you, everyone.
So yes. They fascinate me. A lot of them become religious sites. They get Cistercian abbeys or whatever on them. Whitney, yes, I think is one as well. Yeah. So have a look at your LiDAR, have a look at your topographical maps, and you'll find that these places will want Botley. No, not Botley actually, because there's another place name element that's Lee, and which means an opened area for pasture. So Botley doesn't count, unfortunately. It would have to be Botany or Botsea, or something like that to make it an island name usually. There are exceptions, but and there are loads in Somerset levels, like Muchelney, the big island, Muckle, meaning big, Muchelney, or Godney, or in the Fens, there are loads like Northey. Is it Northey that I'm trying to think of? Thorney is the one I'm trying to think of. Thorney Island, it's very frequent. It's an island with thorn trees on them. So yeah, I love knees and Z's.
Thanks. Just one last, if I may. I was quite intrigued by the hidden stone.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I ought to have a look to see what Gelling says about that. But for all Gelling's wonderfulness, I don't think she got out on the ground as much as an archaeologist would. That's why I think there's so much more to pick up from this. Durn. So we have things like Durnfield, and there's a Durn on the River Avon in Hampshire, Durn Ford, the hidden ford. So I'm assuming, without checking, that Durn stone is a hidden stone. But don't know.
How lovely to have a mystery.
Yeah, and there are lots of mysterious names there. But we really need, if there was a stone, it needs to be found, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't mention that Hawk's Tumulus or Hafox Lachlaw is now known as the Idlebush Barrow. Apparently, idle means the empty barrow. So perhaps someone delved into it and found no treasure in there, at some stage.
Surprisingly unscheduled. I can't believe it isn't scheduled.
You're joking. No. On the LiDAR, it looks like quite a hefty little barrow, that one.
It's a whopper.
Yeah.
And an appropriate final comment from Dave Kavanagh. How do you say goodbye in Old English?
Oh, God, I want to know. And I don't. I only do place names. And they don't say goodbye.
Should you say cheers?
They're here forever. Cheers.
But thank you very much, Wyn. It's been absolutely fascinating, and I've been riveted. So I'm sure everyone has. So thank you, everyone, for turning up. And Wyn, you're a legend.
been a
So
pleasure.
thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Thanks very much. And thank you to all of you for listening.
Thank you very much.